So for me, the lecturer was always irrelevant. So for me, it was the concept of attending the lecture and understanding that this was a battle, this was a war.
Students, we have this phenomenon of bunking classes. What would you say to maybe a student who says, but I bunk classes because maybe I don't understand the lecturer and everything, because there is this preconceived sense that lectures are not important. Sometimes a student, this thing of peer pressure, you see other people bunking classes, you also bunk classes and everything like that. How important is it to attend lectures, and what strategies can students actually implement in lectures, because that is where everything starts?
So if you actually analyze the top students in varsity, I haven't done a study on this, but if you analyze the top students, I mean, I'm talking about the people in the dean's list. I'm talking about smart, really top guys.
Sure.
All of them are doing it. So then you've got to ask yourself, if the top guys are attending classes, and I'm busy and not attending classes, who do I think I am? Like, if the top guys are doing, but essentially, what I would say to comments like that is to say to you is that that's very dangerous. The reason why I'm saying that's very dangerous is that what you need to understand, the way you learn in varsity is not like in high school. I mean, if I was in high school, in a high school setting, perhaps you could argue because the way of examining is around factual basis. I mean, we all remember whether it was CAPS or NSC, there were stories where you do hundreds of past papers and then essentially at some point the pattern would repeat itself and then you'd be ready for that exam. But in varsity, what you need to understand, they're trying to teach you to be a mathematician or an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer. When you're in practice, a problem comes and you have to find solutions to it. Most of the time, it's going to be something you've never seen before. I mean, a patient will come to you if you're a doctor and the textbook will say X, but you probably haven't seen, like COVID, for example. No doctor would have predicted this, but the principles around general medicine and how you treat people will not change. So essentially, the universities are examining the way in which they want you to be produced as a professional in God. So what I always say is that don't fight a system that's designed to produce a certain output. Understand that system and adapt to it so that you can ensure the success of you leaving it as quickly as possible.
Sure.
So that, I mean, if you look at a textbook, for example, and you're reading it, right? The idea behind these books, they're not necessarily designed for you to understand the context per se. So for example, a person writing a book is usually an academic, and their idea is for them to synthesize information that they've gathered from research, right? And the idea behind the textbook, it's not to really give you the context behind why, but necessarily tell you, okay, this is the principle, because it's tried and tested. The idea behind the textbook, we try to, probably in their research papers, the people who wrote the textbook did explain the why, but now it's been validated so many times and people have tested it quantitatively and all this, that it's in a textbook now it's generally accepted practice. So the textbook won't go about explaining the data they collected to get to that information. Unfortunately, as a student, you need to understand the why behind that information. The reason for this, like, I'll give an example. When a question paper comes, and ultimately the ultimate test for all of us is going to be that question paper in the exam room.
Sure.
So the idea is that how do I maximize the potential of me doing well in that exam room when it eventually comes? And the exam will come. If you look at most of the question papers in varsity for all the modules and all the courses out there, and you check how they're actually designed, right? These questions are not asking factual statements. They're not going to ask you, Ben, what is the right of privacy? Or what is an asset? What is this? No, they don't ask that. They simply don't. And unfortunately, if you're going to study on your own, the way a textbook is designed is for you to answer those type of questions. A textbook is written for you to understand what is this. But when you go to the exam room, what's going to be happening? they're not going to be asking you, what is this? The what is this will come in as a context within you answering the question, but it's not going to be the main thing. They're not going to ask you that. It's usually going to be, Mr. Ben is a 25-year-old. He entered into an accident with someone. And when they entered into the accident, this person did this. Please advise on the legal implications of this activity. Do you see, that has nothing to do with the fact that you could have studied that the law says X and Y when this happens, right? But the exam room is not going to ask you that. They're going to give you a real life problem, and then you're going to have to use and pull all these bits of information together to answer the question, right? So how are you going to pull that information if you didn't understand that, shucks, when there's an accident, I should be thinking this. I should be thinking this type of legislation, because the trigger, that's what the trigger. The textbook is not going to say that. The textbook is going to say, this is what the law says on accidents. But now, where the lecture comes in, where the lecturers are good at, these guys have been exposed to the information so many times. It's fluff. So you don't have to focus on this per se, because this is the fluff, this is the facts. We're not going to ask you this. We want you to understand the why. So they're going to explain to you what to look out for in an exam for you to know that this principle is going to apply. Good lecturers will do that. And the question becomes, what if the lecturer doesn't explain that? Well, that's your job as a student to ask those probing questions. Why, how, and what? So that even if the lecturer didn't plan to explain that specific important aspect, you can still get the benefit. So for me, the lecturer was always irrelevant. So for me, it was the concept of attending the lecture and understanding that this was a battle, this was a war. Most of the time, if you look at most failures that happen in an exam where people don't do well, you could probably trace it to that first interaction where they missed the plot, i.e. when they first exposed them to that information, they didn't get the concept, and it was a struggle ever since. So you really understand this is a war. When you go to the exam, you're fighting for your future, you want to be successful, you want to leave the system in record time as quickly as possible. So how do I increase the chances of that happening? I need to understand the tricks of the game. I need to understand the system. The system in most varsities is designed to test you on a problem, to develop your critical thinking and your problem solving abilities. So it means when I learn, I need to gear my learning towards problem solving and critical thinking. So that means I need to do, a majority of the time I need to be doing questions, majority of the time I need to be teaching others, majority of the time I need to be consulting, asking probing questions, why, what's going on. But you can't do that if you don't have a good foundation first. So the foundation comes from the lecture where you understand the what, the why, and the how. And you'll find that maybe for your audience, they could try this. Maybe next time when they're in a lecture, when they're watching a lecture video, for every new principle that's being introduced, maybe they could be teaching you about, I don't know, quadratic equations, maybe, or whatever they're doing, whatever concept. Try to ask, why is this important? How is this going to apply? And what is this? And then once they've answered those questions, all the principles, then tell them to go to the textbook. Look how easier it's going to be for you to read that textbook, because immediately you're going to be able to identify fluff and stuff that you don't need for your studies. And it makes your studying time way quicker, because instead of reading irrelevant, useless facts that even your lecturers never read, what you need to understand, some of these textbooks, even your lecturers don't read. So why are you reading? Why are you spending time? Not just that you shouldn't read the textbook, obviously, because it's important. But the idea that I'm going to read the textbook and be fine is a fallacy. And I think it's something that we need to change, because the whole concept of going to class is for someone to guide you. It's difficult.